Hello, on to another episode of Tales from the CyberLab. And today we're going to be talking about the impact of crime on SME businesses. And joining me on the call today is John Greenwood from Bedfordshire Police. John, would you like to just introduce yourself, tell the people at home a little bit about who you are, what you do?
Yeah, sure. So already had the introduction, John Greenwood. So I work for the Eastern Region Special Operations Unit, which is a regional organised crime unit. There's 9 regional organised crime units in the UK, and we work across serious threat areas. So my area is cyber, and I am one of the cyber protect coordinators. So people often go, well, what's that? And I think it's really difficult because most people associate policing with knocking on doors, traditional policing. But obviously times have changed and so have threats. And cyber is a really large threat against individuals and our economy as a whole. So every force in the UK has a cyber protect officer, and their job really is to engage with individuals and businesses to try and make them more resilient against cybercrime and improve their cyber maturity, if you like, their digital hygiene.
Yeah.
And myself and my colleague Hayley, we coordinate that piece of work for the 7 forces in the Eastern region. So that's Norfolk, Suffolk, Cambridgeshire, Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire, Essex, and Kent.
Okay.
And so we have people in each of those regions, and we're just trying to pull that together.
Cool. All right. Thank you. Well, I think we can probably dive straight in. We won't be following the normal format for the podcast because it's kind of a slightly different. And although I think you talk about a lot of the things that that we talk about to customers here at CyberLab, it's obviously from a different perspective. So it feels like a little bit of a dark art to me because, obviously we've spoken before, but I think it's a unique perspective that you're able to offer because you're doing it from the enforcement perspective. So I think you kind of covered off some of this. So the first thing I was going to ask is about your role and experience with handling cybercrime, especially in relation to SMEs. What are the most common types of cyber attacks that SMEs are facing these days?
Yeah. So I've been in the policing area. I'm police staff, but I've been in this policing area for about 6 years now. And it always amazes me that, yes, new things come about and cyber is a really interesting and ever-changing area, but a lot of the threats and trends really have been persistent. They've just changed their modus operandi slightly or their techniques, things, but it's still the same core messaging that I've been talking about for 6 years. That is really the stuff we need to get across. But from an SME point of view, protect officers in each of the forces do lots of different engagements. We do staff awareness training. We have engagement tools like cyber escape rooms. We also have an investing in infrastructure exercising tool. And obviously all of our core content comes from the NCSC. So I think from a what happens point of view, I have colleagues who work in ERSOU, so they investigate cybercrime. My remit really is around the protect and prepare. So this is give people advice, stop them being victims, and improve their cybersecurity. And then from a prepare point of view is improving business resilience, ideally. What do we see? Ransomware, unfortunately, is probably the number one driver. Yeah. And interestingly, when you look at things like the cybersecurity breaches survey, it's normally phishing at the top. And ransomware is down at 6%. Often the main problem we encounter in law enforcement is underreporting and not reporting of cybercrime. And I think, there's different reasons for that. Some of that is, the worry, the stigma around it, but also I think the big one is the reputational damage. What will happen if this gets out? So, ransomware, I often, I'm sort of the point of contact when we're trying to offer advice to the organization post event, if you like.
Yeah.
Obviously, we don't want to crowd them. They're under a lot of stress. So it's normally do you need anything? Can we help with anything? No. Brilliant. Okay. You've got your incident response companies in, your insurance companies notified. You're on top of this. We'll come back to you in a week, 2 weeks, and then let's see what we can do to help strengthen your cyber resilience in the long term. We do also see, the typical phishing techniques. Normally they're initial compromise, and that's normally going to ransomware or data extortion of some type.
It's all intrinsically linked, really. Unfortunately, these days, that there's different. They categorize these things as different threats. But it's all part of the same story. That the phishing is typically where it will start, and they will then use whatever level of access or credentials that they've been able to exfiltrate or steal from someone or trick them into doing. They will then use that then to further the attack and ideally, in their eyes, lead to ransomware. So one thing that I think I found quite interesting there that you mentioned, that was the cyber escape rooms. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Like what's involved in that?
Yeah, sure. So this is a tabletop exercise. Yeah, it's a tabletop exercise, and it was developed by the Met Police. And the key reason really is before I moved into this area of police, and I was in education for over 10 years. And with all things, if you say, oh, there's a talk on cybersecurity for 50 minutes, and people are instantly on the back foot. Yeah. Cybersecurity is one of those top. It's like when you turn up and go, oh, we're going to have a presentation on the GDPR today, and people are like, oh, here we go.
Yeah.
So it's trying to make interesting topics, isn't it? Trying to make it engaging. And the escape room is one of the tools we use. It's we build it into things like staff training, but we also deliver it at public events and things. So it's a team-based in-person exercise. They have a case to solve, basically, and it covers things, the basics really. So it covers things like your personal hygiene, say personal digital hygiene, so strong passwords, two-step verification, phishing, account compromise, social engineering, ransomware, backups, and all those things, but in a gamified way. And we often find, we'll normally try and do that as a part one, if you like. So we do the escape room, and people walk in and go, we're doing cyber training. They walk in and are like, what is going on here? Yeah. What are you doing in an escape room? Oh, are we? Okay. And then we take the lessons learned, if you like, out of that and just expand on that and try and make it relevant to them as an individual. Because for me, that's the big thing. Companies, not a lot of companies do cybersecurity awareness training, unfortunately. And if they do, they probably just do an online package where it's very much like click answer one, click answer two.
In order for the engagement to land with the people that's doing it, you're exactly right. They have to be engaged. And I think that's a fantastic way of doing it. Those tabletop exercises, I mean, when you do them all the time, they can become a bit of a nose. But if you're doing something new, it's a really good way to get people thinking about, oh, we haven't thought about that, or I hadn't even considered that was a potential problem. But I can now see that we've not considered that. So, I mean, I think it's an invaluable way for businesses to do that 360-degree looking back at themselves, and certainly, and then being able to do lessons learned. And then I'd imagine that the follow-on tabletop exercise might be a bit slicker than, when once they've taken some of this stuff away.
Yeah, and I think we do also do managers tabletop exercises as well. And I always think they're quite interesting because often, there's a disconnect between the managers and the technical teams. Yes. And so actually you ask a question, they'll be like, well, can we do that? Yeah. No. Oh, yeah, we can do that. And then I'll be like, well, how long will it take? And they'll be like, oh, what, an hour? And they're like, 3 days. And you're like, 3 days? So it's understanding those choke points. Companies might go, yeah, we've got an incident response plan, but have they tested? Have they looked at their backups? All of those sorts of things. I worked with a business a while back, and they were a small business, and they said, yeah, we've got a backup. And I said, oh, great. Where is it? And they said, it's cloud backup. I went, okay. And I go, have you tested it? And they said, well, it says verified on the screen. And I said, well, okay, but have you tested it? And it was only when I said, how long will it take to do a full recovery from that? The IT person said, about a week and a half. And the manager was just in shock. They were like, how long? How would we do that? So then it's thinking about, prioritizing, simple things, but often, like you say, they're not really thought about till you're doing an exercise.
But the other point that you've touched upon, I think this is a fantastic tool, is for getting the different areas of the business talking about cybersecurity. It's something that I think I mention it in pretty much every one of these podcasts that I do now, because I think it's a message that if people haven't quite got the hang of it, or haven't it hasn't sunk in, I need to keep repeating it to try and raise the profile. And that's cybersecurity is not an IT issue; it's a business issue. and there are elements that require input from all areas of the business. And these kind of escape rooms I think that's a fantastic way of doing it. And exactly those types of conversations that you had, that's the real value, where all of a sudden they've all talked about this stuff before, like recovery point objectives being a good example, where management's expectation is that it's this, but then when it's actually seen, it's like, well, no, that's not the reality at all. And that can then pose a question to the business of like, well, are we happy with that? Or do we need to be trying to do something else? And exactly whether that's prioritizing, right, what is the critical infrastructure that we need to get restored first so that we can get back up and running as quickly as possible. But I think that's a fantastic way of getting these things out in the open and starting to crack the whole thing open. But you're exactly right around instant response and stuff like that. If you don't test these things, and testing backups, again, the number of people that I talk to, it's like, when was the last time you actually just did a test restore to make sure that the data that you've backed up and you're like, it's verified, I've got a copy of that, will it actually work when you restore it? Now, I would say that this is less of a problem than it used to be, because the media and that we're storing it on is less volatile, than tape and the other stuff that we used to use. But I think there's still a place for it, that just for that peace of mind that it's going to work when you press the button. I would certainly want to be testing them, even in a very limited capacity, just say, right, it looks good. It looks good.
That's often the stumbling block we find, is businesses say, well, I don't think we can get those 4 people in the room or those 8 people in the room. And it's like, well, you're going to have to when the time comes. So
exactly,
you surely want it to be a slicker response when it happens.
Absolutely. Absolutely right.
So, I think just to add as well, sorry, quickly, I often look at the analogy of fire alarms, like fire drills. Businesses are all over that from a health and safety point of view, and they have their exits, they're marked up, they have drills, they do all of that. Well, I would say a cyber attack is more likely than a fire.
Yeah.
It's likewise.
And no one's bothering to exercise or test them or double check that the way they think it's going to work is actually the way that it's going to work, and you understand who needs to be involved and stuff like that. So let's talk a little bit more about, so we've talked about what the threats facing SMEs are. What about the impact? So this is something, again, in other podcasts that I'm sort of, we've taken a step away from talking to people about how things work internally. We're exploring, like we're doing here today, what does this look like from an external perspective? Because it's not something that, unless you've actually been directly involved with it, and probably frequently involved in it, you're not really going to be familiar with it. You're not really going to understand what happens from the legal aspect, what are we going to get from them, and what are the regulatory things. We might know these things, but we don't actually necessarily understand how they work in the background. I think it's interesting to hear your perspective of what you see as the impact of these different types of cyber attacks. And so, I mean, normally I should say cyber incidents, not attacks, because they're not always an attack. But if the police are involved, more than likely it is going to be an attack that we're talking about. So in terms of like financial, operational disruption, reputational damage, what are the kinds of things that you see happening there?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Financial is quite tangible, isn't it? You can say, oh, it's cost us X. I think the problem I often encounter there is that businesses don't realize that actually that's going to be a long-term cost. You've got a lot of remediation in the back end. It's not just, we got X, Y, and Z in to fix A, B, and C, and they've done it. There's also what about the time you've lost? What about, and really good example of this, I was doing some exercising with an organization, and we did a ransomware scenario basically. And I said, well, your phones are down as well because they're internet connected, aren't they? And if your infrastructure's down, made that decision, you're probably not got any phones working. And first off, they weren't sure if they were. And the IT guy was like, yep, all our phones are, we wouldn't have any phones. And then there was how would we, people could still ring mobiles. And I was like, okay. So then you're taking paper-based notes. Then you've got to transfer that. So then where's your human resource going to come from for that in the long run? So I do think there's the longevity of it needs to be considered. The key thing for me, which is really difficult to quantify, is that reputational damage.
Yeah.
And I've worked with organizations who have been excellent, who've come out and, they've gone, this is our press release. This is what we're sending to our, our clients, our customers. This is what we put on our website. And this is how we're going to update them. Superb. Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly.
I've seen others.
And you can't do any better than that. That's the best that you can do, really.
Yeah, exactly. And they made their stand. They said, this is what we're doing. This is what's happened. We'll update you regularly. And they have done that. And, I would say, like you say, gold standard, their customers are going to then feel valued and they know what's happening, don't they? I do a technical scenario as well. And I work with a technical team. And the question I had was, when are you going to elevate this? When are you telling your manager and when are you telling your customers? And there was this discussion between, newer and older. And some of them were like, well, I just wouldn't tell the customer. And the older are like, but then if it cuts out, that's our reputation gone, isn't it? Yeah. So I think often businesses don't think of that PR response.
Correct.
And often what we see, especially in ransomware, is maybe the ransomware actor will engage with one of the senior staff. And I've seen WhatsApp messages posted, which is a conversation between the ransomware actor and a managing director. And they'll stand there and say to me, no, nothing's happened. And I'll be like, well, here's the WhatsApp messages. And they're still saying, no, nothing's happened. We've not lost anything, but the information's there. It's in the clear sort of thing. So I think, like you say, getting a handle on it and coming out is really important. And reputational damage, you can't quantify that. So it's probably, I think it's the thing you need to treat with the most kid gloves, because it could be all encompassing. If your reputation is shot, then you're not going to get any new clients. So, downtime might have cost you 10 grand, but if you're not getting any new clients, your business is over.
These intangible costs. But the thing is, it's also, you say it. I say it's intangible, but that doesn't mean that it's inconsequential, because this can seriously affect the future prospects of your business. And one of the other things that was interesting that you touched upon there, around where we're talking around how some organizations are organized about putting this stuff out there. I'm of the opinion that looking on a long enough timeline, at the moment we can put organizations into have suffered a cyber incident or data breach and have not suffered a cyber incident and data breach. Now there was an old adage, I think it was around storage, and it was the people who have encountered a storage failure and those who haven't encountered a storage failure yet. And I kind of think that the same is going to apply to organizations, that it's only a matter of time until the number of organizations sat in that category of like not had a breach, not had a cyber, unless they're doing very, very good cybersecurity. But the number of people that sit in that bracket is going to vastly diminish compared to the other side, because most people are going to suffer with these things. And instead of measuring people on whether they've been hit or whether they've had an incident or not, I think that we're going to see a shift in the sort of the market to, it's looking at how well the people coped when they had breach and whether or not they did everything correctly. Because I think that that's really going to be what becomes important moving forwards. It's not, it's the organization that I want to start dealing with. Are they going to make a complete mess of it if we have a breach and make the problem worse? Or are they going to be upfront, open, reassure customers and reassure investors and anyone else like that they've got this under control and that they're being honest about it, and that there's nothing, they're not trying to hide anything. Apart from anything, there's a legal element, isn't there? If you suffer a data breach, it's illegal for you to not report it to the ICO, depending on the type of data that's been breached, of course.
Depending on the type of data, yeah. And I think it's your personal identifiable information, obviously within 72 hours of a recognized incident. Just going back to what you said, I think there is a grey area of organizations that have suffered a cyber incident aren't aware of it.
That's a very good point.
One of the things
which is that's
because one of the episodes. Yeah, one of the things we also have is we have intelligence passed to us, and we go into businesses and say, we believe we have intelligence that suggests this has happened. And quite rightfully, most of the time the business is like, can you prove you're from the police? And we go through this whole process, and then sometimes it's just access credentials have been made available for sale. Okay, so well, how did they get those? Was that poor staff hygiene, all those sorts of things? Often, I would, quite a lot of the time, business like we have no idea of that. And I delivered one last week, and the business had no idea, and it was, led back to what looked like a suspected SQL injection attack on our website form, basically.
Right. So they'd been hacked, and someone had worked way in from the outside.
Yeah, and there was quite significant amounts of PII there, and then it got onto conversations of I think you need to look at your data retention policy and why is that there. So our job isn't my role in the protect area is really just to try and inform people, and try and get them to think about those changes they could do to make their digital security better. So I'll give you another example. We had a firm that got hit with ransomware. They used a lot of cloud services, but what they also had was a photocopier. And so when people photocopy files, the photocopies, the scans, if you like, were kept locally on that device.
Right.
And they never wiped them. So, they couldn't get into any of the cloud files, but they could get this treasure trove of scanned documents, which, they didn't have wipe this down weekly or daily or anything like that. Yeah. There was 2 years worth of scans on that.
Wow.
So, simple things. And sometimes, we talk often, it's, like humans are the main weakness. Well, humans can be a great strength if you train them.
That's exactly what I say. They can be your the sort of your greatest asset, or they can be your greatest sort of weakness in your cyber defenses.
Yeah, and I think that naturally leads on as well to patching devices. I go into charities, especially and schools and things like that, and I'll see devices that are past end of life, like years past end of life. And they'll often the comments, oh, well, we know it's past, but we're going to move next year, so then we'll replace it. And it's like, it's fret now. What's your risk strategy around that? Like I often think, if you're in a factory and you had a particularly dangerous machine, you'd have all those risk strategies in place, wouldn't you? You'd be like, well, only a trained person can use it. They've got to have the right PPE. They've got to be observed, trained, all those sorts of things. Well, likewise for a asset that potentially doesn't have the security it should.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Very good point. So going just out of idle interest, really, going back to, do you see, is it once in a while that you come across an organization that's been hacked and they don't know anything about it, or that they've had a data breach or something is this something that you come across once in a while, or is it quite a common occurrence?
No, it's pretty common. So the Cyber Breaches Survey said that I think it's a third, 33% of businesses had security monitoring tools. And we see both sides. So I worked with a business this week and I spoke to them and they were like, well, we've got all of this security in place and nothing's come up. But the breach was on a different system that wasn't within their area. And it was a website one, actually, I mentioned earlier. Equally, I work with businesses and they'll say, we just weren't aware of that. We had no idea. And we are seeing more and more businesses looking now at using intelligence, basically more. And often from a practical point of view and a financial point of view, it makes more sense to outsource that. Yeah. So things like web scraping, breach forum scraping, things like that. And also data breaches themselves, like have I been pwned and other resources, just the simpler services. Because often we find, most businesses will say, no, we don't think that's happened. And the other is a negative. They'll say, we've got no evidence that any data is being stolen. And I'll say, well, have you got any evidence that data hasn't been stolen? And then they'll say, well, we've got no logs. So, for me, you've got to take that as we can't prove that nothing's been stolen. So we need to do our homework on this and we need to do our investigation.
Let's talk a little bit more about how can SMEs collaborate with the likes of people like you across the country to improve their cyber resilience. How do they go about engaging on doing that?
Excellent. So I would say there's two main points. So the first off is there is a load of great resources out there, but often it's the wood for the trees. There's too many.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think the first point of call is to make contact with your local protect officer. Now, you might need to find your ROCU first. So there is www.rocu.police.uk, ROCU, .police.uk. And then you can find your local ROCU and you can email them basically, and they might have a separate website that talks about their cyber services and things like that. So that would be my first point of call, because often, there's some great stuff out there for SMEs, like action plan for really small organizations, test my cybersecurity from the NCSC. And the NCSC does have really great resources, but from an SME owner looking in, it's very overwhelming.
It's overwhelming. And that's one of the things that we try to, that's one of the messages that we try to convey to customers. And, and I'm going to reiterate it here, is that we know that this stuff can be complicated, and that no one really, if you don't have a background in this kind of thing, even if you've got an IT background, it doesn't necessarily mean that you now understand all the potential different threats and attack vectors that exist in the realm of cybersecurity. So it becomes very overwhelming and overawing almost immediately. And that's what people like me are here for. We want to help people make themselves stronger, give themselves that peace of mind. Sorry, I interrupted your flow on.
No, spot on. I think that's the key thing. That's the thing I always like about cybersecurity is there's lots of people willing to help. It's just you need to know that it's a problem that you need help with in the first place.
Yeah. Which is it does become chicken and egg.
Yeah. So NCSC, great resources, but go in, find your local protection officer. We will do things like staff training, like I've mentioned. We're not going to come in every Wednesday and do staff training sessions, but we will come in and do a session and get you up to speed and help you get on your cyber journey, if you like. Because really, a lot of the things for SMEs really are the basics, unfortunately. So multi-factor authentication, updating devices, strong password policies. Really, our aim is to push people towards looking at and gaining cyber essentials, for instance, which for SMEs, it covers the basics and will make you less likely to be a victim of what are really, most of the time, fairly generic attack types.
It's understanding. I mean, that's the posture assessments that I help to develop, that we run at CyberLab with our customers, are aimed at trying to get a holistic view of what the cybersecurity landscape looks like for that customer, understand the nature of their business, and then provide advice. And rarely the advice is, well, you've actually heavily invested in an area that is not really a major risk for you, whereas you're not investing in this, which is probably going to be the way that someone is going to approach your users. Email security, for example, the chances are that your users are going to get exposed to that. And you've got very little in regards to security there. Microsoft do a reasonable job of giving you something that's better than nothing, but there's still an awful lot of stuff that comes through that, and which is why we tend to layer advanced email security over the top of it.
There's also the cyber resilience centres as well. So they were formed by government, they're police-led, and their aim is to provide long-term support to SMEs as well. So that's another really good point of contact as well. So the cyber resilience centres, there's one in each force area as well.
Right, okay.
And they do free membership like that.
Okay, awesome. That's brilliant. Thank you very much for your time today, John. It's been really interesting talking to you again. It's an area that I've not really had the exposure to from your perspective. So I think it's quite interesting. Hopefully everyone watching has found this useful. If you do have any questions, please reach out to your CyberLab account manager, or reach out and contact us using the links below, or via our website. That's all for today. I'll see you next time. Stay secure.